I'm Ethan, I'm 32 years old, and my own family threw me out onto the street because they thought I was a useless failure. Before I tell you how I ended up buying the very ground beneath their feet, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always amazing to see how far a story can travel. It all came to a head on a gray Sunday afternoon. The air in my parents' living room was thick and suffocating, like a storm was about to break. And I was the eye of that storm. My father, Richard, stood planted in the middle of the room, his face flushed a deep, angry crimson. The vein I knew all too well was pulsing violently on his temple, a tiny serpent of rage. "We're done, Ethan. Do you hear me? Absolutely done." His voice wasn't just loud. It boomed with a righteous fury, rattling the cheap glass figurines on the mantelpiece, the ones my mother, Eleanor, dusted every single day as if they were precious artifacts. My mother sat perfectly still on the floral sofa, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap her knuckles were white. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at a spot on the wall just past my shoulder, her expression a cold, practiced mask of profound disappointment. It was a look I'd seen 1,000 times, a weapon she had perfected over years of use. And then there was my sister, Sophia. She was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed over her chest, a smug little smile playing on her lips. She was savoring this, every single bitter second of it. Sophia, the golden child, the successful corporate lawyer, watching the family problem finally get excised. And me? I was the family's dirty little secret, the college dropout, the perpetual project, the failure. "You're 32 years old," my father continued, his voice dripping with a contempt that felt physical, like acid. 32. And what in God's name do you have to show for it? Nothing. Just this little internet thing you play with in your room like a teenager. It's a disgrace. An embarrassment. "It's a business, Dad," I said, my voice quiet but firm. I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my voice would not betray me. Sophia let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound like breaking glass. "A business? Oh, Ethan, that's adorable. Does your business even cover your car insurance? Or is that still on Mom and Dad's plan? Your father and I have given you everything." My mother finally chimed in, her voice thin and brittle, laced with martyrdom. "We paid for your first car. We let you live under our roof, rent-free, for years after you should have been on your own. We've done our part. It's time for you to face the real world and grow up." "So that's it?" I asked, my gaze shifting from one cold face to another. "After all this time, you're just kicking me out?" My father took a menacing step towards me, his finger jabbing the air inches from my face. "You're damn right we are. We can't enable this fantasy of yours any longer. It's tough love, Ethan. That's what this is. Go get a real job. Go live on the streets if you have to. Maybe that will finally knock some sense into that thick skull of yours. Go live on the streets." The words hung in the air, heavy and final and impossibly cruel. My own father. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. Something inside me, a little flickering flame of hope I didn't even know was still burning, was finally extinguished by their icy words. In its place, something cold and hard and clear began to form. I looked at my father's apoplectic rage, my mother's chilling indifference, and my sister's triumphant smirk, and I did something they never, ever expected. I smiled. It wasn't a big smile, just a small, knowing curve of my lips. I nodded slowly, as if accepting a business proposal. "Okay," I said. I turned and walked to the front door, their stunned silence a palpable force behind me. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't grab my jacket. I didn't take a single thing that belonged to me. I just opened the door and stepped out into the cold afternoon air. As the door clicked shut behind me with a sound of utter finality, I had one clear, ringing thought. They have absolutely no idea what's coming. To understand why I could smile as my world was supposedly falling apart, we have to go back 14 years. I was 18 years old, full of nerves and a terrifying, exhilarating kind of hope. I was sitting right where my father had just been standing, in that same suffocating living room, about to detonate a bomb in the middle of their perfectly manicured lives. I had just told them I wasn't going back to college for my sophomore year. The explosion was instantaneous and absolute. My father, Richard, who had been proudly leafing through the university course catalog, threw it onto the coffee table as if it were on fire. "You're what? Say that again. You're throwing away a full academic scholarship? For what, Ethan? For what possible reason could you have to throw your entire future in the trash?" "It's a business idea, Dad." I tried to explain, my voice cracking with teenage anxiety. "My friend Marcus and we've been working on this thing. We have this plan for an online software platform. We really think it could be huge." "A software platform?" he scoffed, waving his hand dismissively as if shooing a fly. "The world is full of software platforms, written by people with PhDs from Stanford. You need a degree. It's not just a piece of paper. It's the foundation of your life. You need a stable job with a good salary, a 401k, a future. What you're talking about is a lottery ticket, a pipe dream." My mother, Eleanor, immediately began to cry. They were quiet, strategic tears, the kind she could summon at will to manipulate any situation. "What will I tell the neighbors, Richard? What will I tell my sister, Carol? Her daughter," she meant my cousin, of course, "is on the dean's list and applying for internships on Wall Street. And our son is becoming a dropout." Sophia, who was home for the weekend from her own prestigious university, was watching the whole scene from the kitchen doorway, sipping a soda with an air of detached amusement. "Just let him do it, Mom," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "It's his life to ruin. He'll come crawling back in 6 months when he's broke and begging for money to re-enroll. Don't worry, Ethan," she added, giving me a pitying look. "I'm sure the local Starbucks is hiring. It's never too late to get a real job." Their words were like a barrage of stones, but my dream was a shield. I believed in what Marcus and I were doing with every fiber of my being. We had turned Marcus's parents' dusty garage into our headquarters, a chaotic mess of second-hand computers, tangled cables, and a giant whiteboard covered in algorithms and frantic scribbles. We lived on cheap pizza and instant ramen noodles. We worked 18-hour days, fueled by nothing but stale coffee and the pure, undiluted conviction that we were onto something big. I remember one night, around 3 a.m., after days of hitting a wall, we finally cracked a piece of code that was the linchpin of our whole system. We didn't shout or cheer. We just looked at each other, exhausted and grinning like idiots. Marcus, my brilliant, chaotic best friend, grabbed a crumpled napkin from a pizza box and a pen. "This is it," he whispered, his hand flying across the flimsy paper, sketching out a crude flowchart. "This is the core of everything. The engine. If we can build this out, we can change the entire game for how small businesses manage their data." I looked at that greasy napkin, at the frantic blue ink, and I saw our future. It was more real and more tangible to me than any college textbook or lecture hall. This was where I belonged. This was what I was meant to do. I tried to explain this passion, this certainty to my family. I really did. I tried to show them our business plan, the market research, the gap we had identified. They weren't interested. Their eyes glazed over. To them, if it didn't come with a diploma and a fancy job title from a recognizable company, it wasn't real. My father was an insurance salesman who valued security above all else. My mother valued appearances. My garage project offered neither of those things. It was a source of deep personal shame for them, a failure in the making, and they never, ever, for one single day, let me forget it. The first few years were a brutal grind. There were times I was down to my last $20, lying awake at 3 a.m., the mocking voices of my family echoing in my head, wondering if they had been right all along. Marcus and I took on soul-crushing freelance coding jobs, building terrible websites for dentists and plumbers, just to keep the lights on in our tiny, windowless office space. But we never gave up on our core project. We poured every spare hour and every spare dollar into it. And then, slowly, painstakingly, things started to change. Our first big break came from a small, family-owned accounting firm that was drowning in paperwork and willing to take a chance on two kids with a crazy idea. Our software streamlined their workflow so effectively that they saved thousands of dollars in billable hours in the first quarter alone. The owner, a wonderful woman named Mrs. Gable, became our biggest evangelist. She told another firm, and that firm told two more. It was a slow burn, then a steady flame, then a roaring fire. I'll never forget the day I saw the first six-figure deposit hit our company bank account. I was 24 years old. Marcus and I just stared at the screen, utterly speechless. For a full minute, neither of us said a word. We didn't go out and pop champagne or buy fancy cars. We paid off our business loans, hired our first two employees, a programmer and a customer service rep, and moved into a slightly bigger office that actually had a window. Every single dollar went right back into the business, fueling its growth. By the time I was 27, I had quietly made my first million. Felt surreal. I celebrated by buying a modest two-bedroom condo in the city. I paid for it in cash. No mortgage, no loans. It was the first place that was truly and completely mine. And my family had absolutely no idea. To them, I was still just Ethan, who does that little computer thing. I'd show up for Thanksgiving or Christmas, and the conversation would be the same tired, predictable script every single year. Sophia just made partner at her law firm. My mother would announce proudly to anyone who would listen, her voice swelling. She's the youngest partner in the firm's history. We're so incredibly proud of her. That's great, Sophia, I'd say, forcing a smile. Congratulations. She would give me that tight, condescending smile of hers. Thanks, Ethan. How's your little internet thing going? Still working out of that small office over by the industrial park? I just nod. Yeah, it's going okay. Okay was the understatement of the century. By then, we had 50 employees, clients in a dozen countries, and were a multi-million-dollar company. A few years later, I sold a minority stake in the company to a private equity firm for a sum of money that would have made their heads explode. That's when I bought the penthouse. A stunning place on the 40th floor with floor-to-ceiling windows and a panoramic view of the entire city. It was my sanctuary, my private proof that I hadn't been wrong all those years ago. But I never told them. A stubborn, foolish, hopeful part of me still wanted them to be proud of me, of my grit and my vision, not my bank account. I thought that if I just kept my head down and worked, maybe one day they'd see my dedication and respect it for what it was, regardless of the financial outcome. So when I visited them, I drove my old, reliable sedan, not the sleek German sports car parked in my private garage. I wore jeans and a simple shirt. I let them believe I was still the struggling dreamer, just about scraping by. I remember one Christmas Eve vividly. I was 30. I brought over a bottle of single malt scotch that cost over $500. A special vintage I knew my dad secretly loved. He glanced at the label, his eyebrows shooting up in surprise, then quickly knitting together in disapproval. Humph, a bit fancy for you, isn't it, son? You should be saving your money for a down payment on a house, not wasting it on this nonsense. Later that evening, I was walking past the study and overheard my mother talking to my aunt on the phone. Yes, Ethan's here. No, still the same. I just worry sick about his future. Sophia has her life all figured out. But Ethan, I think he's going to need a lot of help from his family inheritance one day when we're gone. There's no pension plan for a little internet thing. I stood in the hallway, the sound of cheerful Christmas music in the background, and I felt completely and utterly invisible. They didn't see me at all. They only saw the failure they had decided I was going to be, all those years ago in that living room. And nothing, it seemed, would ever change their minds. The gap between my reality and their perception of it grew wider and more absurd with every passing year. It became a strange, exhausting double life. In the city, I was the CEO of a thriving tech company. I managed a large team, negotiated multi-million-dollar deals with international corporations, and lived in a home that was more beautiful than I could have ever imagined. But on the weekends, I'd drive out to the suburbs to see my family, and the moment I walked through their front door, I'd instantly shrink back into the role they'd assigned me. The disappointing son, the wayward brother who needed saving from himself. It was like putting on an old, ill-fitting coat that was 2 sizes too small and smelled of failure. The first real sign that their narrative was shifting from passive disappointment to something more actively malicious came from my cousin, Leo. Leo was a few years younger than me, a good kid at heart, but utterly terrified of rocking the boat in our family. He was easily intimidated by the stronger personalities, namely my mother and her gossiping sister, my Aunt Carol. He called me one Tuesday evening, and I could tell from his first hello that something was wrong. His voice was low and hesitant, like he was afraid of being overheard. "Hey Ethan, got a minute?" "Sure, Leo. What's up? Everything okay?" Yeah, everything's fine. It's just, look, I don't want to start any trouble, man." "You're not," I assured him, my stomach starting to clench. "Just tell me what's going on." He took a deep breath. "Aunt Carol was over for dinner last night, and, well, she and your mom were talking. About you. A lot." I felt a familiar tightening in my gut. This was never good. What were they saying? Just, the usual stuff at first. That they're worried about you. That your project isn't really going anywhere and you're not getting any younger. But then it got worse. Aunt Carol started saying that she heard from a reliable source that you were having serious money problems. That you might even be deep in credit card debt. I was speechless. I was sitting on a custom-made Italian leather sofa that cost more than Aunt Carol's car, looking out at a multi-million-dollar view, and they were gossiping about me being in debt. The disconnect was staggering. That's not true, Leo," I said, struggling to keep my voice even. "You know that's not true." "I know, man, I know. But they talk. And Aunt Carol, she has this way of sounding so sincere and concerned, Like she's just heartbroken for you." She was saying things like, "Poor Ethan. He just tried so hard and it didn't work out. Eleanor, you and Richard need to prepare for how you're going to support him in his old age." So that was it. The narrative was evolving. They weren't just passively disappointed anymore. They were actively constructing a detailed, elaborate story of my failure. A story that cast them as the caring, long-suffering parents of a troubled son. It was a lie they were telling not just to the rest of the family, but to themselves. Protected their fragile worldview. It proved, in their minds, that they had been right to disapprove of my choices from the very beginning. I thanked Leo for his courage in telling me, my mind racing. It all started to make sense now. The pitying looks during family gatherings. The constant, unsolicited advice about getting a real job. The not-so-subtle offers to help me out with my bills. They weren't trying to help me. They were trying to confirm their own bias. They needed me to fail. A few days later, my mom sent me a text message. Her texts were always a strange mix of feigned affection and passive aggression. "Ethan, darling, your father and I need to have a serious talk with you this weekend. It's important. We're very, very worried about you." I read the message, and a cold dread washed over me. This wasn't just a casual chat. This was a summons. Leo's warning echoed in my ears. I felt like I was a lamb being invited to the slaughter. But a small, stupid part of me, the part that still ridiculously craved their approval, felt I had to go. I had to face them. Maybe, just maybe, if I sat them down and told them the truth, the whole truth, I could finally make them understand. I was so incredibly wrong. I walked into that living room on Sunday with a knot in my stomach the size of a fist. I'd spent the entire 40-minute drive rehearsing a speech in my head. I was going to be calm, rational, and professional. I was going to lay out the facts about my company as if I were presenting to an investor. I had even brought a folder with printouts of our growth charts, our revenue numbers, and a list of our major clients. I was going to prove to them, with irrefutable data, that I was not a failure. But I never even got the chance to open the folder. The moment I stepped inside, I knew this was an ambush. They were all there, arranged in the room like a tribunal waiting for a condemned man. My father in his armchair, the seat of judgment. My mother on the sofa, clutching a throw pillow like a shield. And Sophia leaning against the wall, arms crossed, the smug executioner. The air was thick with unspoken accusations. "Ethan, sit down," my father commanded, pointing to the stiff, uncomfortable chair that was set apart from the rest of the furniture. The one nobody ever used. The defendant's chair. I remained standing, my hands in my pockets. What's this all about? It's about your life, Ethan, my mother said, her voice trembling with a carefully manufactured emotion that I knew all too well. We can't just stand by and watch you throw it all away any longer. It's our duty as your parents to step in. Sophia pushed herself off the wall, taking a step forward. We're doing this because we love you, she said, her tone making the word love sound like a four-letter word. Sometimes, love has to be tough. Brian agrees, she added, name-dropping her fiancé. He's a partner at his firm, and he says situations like yours require a firm hand. My father cleared his throat and picked up a stack of glossy papers from the table beside him. They were brochures. One was for a local community college, offering night classes in accounting. Another was for a real estate licensing course. The third was an application for a warehouse supervisor position at a friend's company. We've been looking into some realistic options for you, he began, his tone paternalistic and condescending. It's not too late to get a qualification, a real one. You could get your real estate license in a few months. Or go back to school, get a degree in business administration. I have connections. My friend Bob over at the logistics company is hiring. He said he'd interview you as a favor to me. It wouldn't pay much to start, of course, but it's a respectable career. A real salary with benefits. I stared at the brochures, then at his earnest, completely misguided face. It was so profoundly disconnected from my reality it felt like I was in a surreal play. I don't need an entry-level job, Dad. I have a career. I am the CEO of a company. Stop it, he snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. Stop calling it that. It's a hobby that has gone on for far too long, and it's time to put it to bed. Your mother and I, we lie awake at night worrying about you, about what will happen to you when we're gone. Who will take care of you? Your sister has her own family to think about. She can't be expected to support you forever. Support me? I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that surprised even me. You think Sophia supports me? Sophia's eyes narrowed into slits. Someone has to be the responsible one in this family. While you've been playing games on your computer in a fantasy world, I've been in the real world building a real career. I just got a major promotion at my firm. I'm responsible for a team of associates. I have a mortgage. I have responsibilities. It was then that I asked the question. The one I knew was pointless, the last desperate shot from a sinking ship. If I told you that my hobby generated more profit last year than all of your salaries combined, would you believe me? Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. Then a snort from Sophia. Then my father started to laugh. A deep, mocking belly laugh that shook his whole body. My mother just shook her head, a sad little smile of pity on her face. Oh, Ethan, she said softly, as if speaking to a child. The delusion is even worse than we thought. That was it. That was the moment the last thread of hope I had for them snapped. They weren't just mistaken. They were willfully blind. They actively preferred the story of my failure to the reality of my success because it validated their own life choices. My father's laughter died down, and his face became a mask of hard resolve. He stood up, towering over me. Here's the ultimatum. You will enroll in one of these courses by the end of the month. You will shut down that website or whatever it is you do, and you will start contributing to this household with a real paycheck. If you refuse, you need to pack your things and leave. We will not have a 32-year-old child living in a fantasy world under our roof any longer. That's when he said it. The line that would echo in my head for weeks to come. The final, brutal severance. Go live on the streets if you have to. Maybe that will finally wake you up. And in that moment of absolute painful clarity, I knew what I had to do. I looked at their determined, unyielding faces and I gave them the one thing they didn't expect. My calm, quiet acceptance. And my smile. Leaving that house felt like stepping out of a pressure cooker into the open air. The afternoon was cold and gray, but I could finally breathe. I got into my old, unassuming sedan, the one I kept just for these suburban visits, and drove. I didn't head back to the city, not at first. I just drove aimlessly through the quiet, tree-lined streets, the ones I'd grown up on, feeling like a ghost haunting my own past. An hour later, I was standing in my penthouse. The sun was beginning its descent, and the city below was transforming into a glittering carpet of a million lights. The contrast was staggering, almost violent. In that house, I was a worthless burden, a delusional child. Here, surrounded by the silent testament to my hard work, I was myself. The pain was still there, a raw, aching wound in my chest. But for the very first time, there was also a sense of profound, liberating freedom. I was finally irrevocably free from the crushing weight of their expectations. I pulled out my phone and called Marcus. "They did it," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "They actually kicked me out." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Marcus's voice, firm and clear. "Good. It's about damn time. You're free, man. Welcome to the first day of the rest of your life." He was right. The first week was defined by an unnerving quiet. I dove into my work, putting in 16-hour days, finding a strange comfort in the clean logic and order of code and spreadsheets. It was a world that made sense, where effort produced results. I didn't hear a single word from my family. No angry follow-up texts, no remorseful voicemails. Just absolute, deafening silence. It was as if I had ceased to exist the moment I closed their front door. I thought that was the worst part. The complete and total severance, the casual erasure of my existence. But I was wrong. That was just the beginning of their war. The real attack was yet to come. The rumors started to trickle in during the second week. Leo called me again, his voice even more strained and uncomfortable than the last time. "Ethan, you're not gonna like this," he started, his words tumbling out in a rush. "Just tell me, Leo. I can handle it." He hesitated. "It's your mom. She was at her weekly church group meeting, and she was crying. She told everyone that your business had finally failed, that you lost everything, and that you had a huge, terrible fight with your dad, and now you're homeless. She told them you're living out of your car." I sank down into my chair, the phone feeling heavy as a brick in my hand. Living out of my car. She wasn't just letting people believe I was struggling. She was meticulously painting a public portrait of my absolute destitution. She was turning me into a tragedy to elicit sympathy for herself, to cast herself in the role of the heartbroken, long-suffering mother. It got worse. A few days later, Marcus forwarded me a screenshot from social media. It was from an old high school acquaintance, someone I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. The post read, "Just ran into Sophia Reed at the mall. She was telling me the absolute saddest story about her brother, Ethan. Apparently, he's really going through a hard time, made some bad choices. She said the family is trying their best to help, but he's just too proud and angry to accept it. She said they're having to let him learn his lesson the hard way. So tough to see a family go through that. The hard way." They were framing their breathtaking cruelty as a noble act of tough love. They weren't the villains who had thrown their son and brother out into the cold. No, they were the heroes, bravely trying to save him from himself. They were controlling the narrative with practiced skill, ensuring that in everyone's eyes, they were the victims and I was the ungrateful, self-destructive architect of my own demise. The anger began to burn away the last vestiges of pain. This wasn't just a family dispute anymore. This was a calculated, public campaign to destroy my reputation and assassinate my character. I didn't fully understand why they needed to go this far, not yet. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I could not just let it happen. They had drawn a line in the sand, and I was about to cross it with an army they didn't even know existed. The third week after I was kicked out, I received an email that changed the entire game. It was the catalyst that turned my cold anger into a calculated plan of action. It wasn't from a person. It was a sterile, automated notification from my bank. The subject line was simple and innocuous. Unusual account activity. I almost deleted it without a second thought. I get dozens of automated emails a day from various services. But for some reason, my finger hovered over the trash icon. A flicker of instinct made me click it open instead. The email was flagging too large, identical withdrawals from a personal savings account. It was an old account, one I'd set up when I was 16 as an emergency fund and had mostly forgotten about. I rarely touched it. The balance was, or should have been, around $20,000. My heart started to beat a little faster, a low thrum of anxiety in my chest. I logged into my online banking portal, my fingers fumbling on the keyboard as a strange sense of dread began to creep over me. I navigated to the old, dormant savings account. My blood ran cold. The screen seemed to mock me. 2 withdrawals made 3 days apart just last week. The first for $7,500. The second for $7,500. A total of $15,000. Vanished. I clicked on the transaction details, my mind refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. A sense of disbelief warred with a rising tide of horror. The funds had been transferred internally and then used to issue a cashier's check. My name wasn't on the withdrawal slip. The authorized signature on the account, a relic from the past, was a name I knew as well as my own, Eleanor Reed. My mother. She was still listed as a co-signer on the account from when I was a teenager, a detail I had completely and stupidly overlooked for years. She had walked into a bank branch, used her authority on the account, and taken my money. Not borrowed. Taken. Without a word, without a text, without any communication at all. I leaned back in my chair, the air knocked out of my lungs. My own mother. The woman who had just days before accused me of being irresponsible, a financial drain. The woman who was telling her friends and our family that I was homeless and destitute. She had stolen from me. Why? The question screamed in my head. For what possible reason? The answer came a few hours later, delivered via the casual cruelty of social media, and it was more insulting, more profoundly dismissive than I could have possibly imagined. I was scrolling numbly through my social media feed when a new post from Sophia popped up. It was a picture of her, beaming, standing next to a brand new, top-of-the-line luxury SUV. The kind of car that costs a fortune to buy and even more to maintain. The kind of car a junior partner at a law firm, even one with a recent promotion and a mountain of student debt, would have to stretch to afford. The caption was a masterpiece of oblivious entitlement. Huge surprise gift from the best and most generous parents in the world. My old car was on its last legs and they just insisted on helping me out. Feeling so blessed and loved. Hashtag best parents ever, hashtag family first, hashtag spoiled. The numbers clicked into place in my head with the sickening, final sound of a jail door slamming shut. The down payment for a vehicle like that, it would be somewhere in the neighborhood of $15,000. I stared at the picture, at the gleaming black paint of the car, at my sister's triumphant smile, at the hashtag family first. And I felt a rage so pure and so cold it was almost perfectly calm. They hadn't just thrown me out. They hadn't just slandered my name to anyone who would listen. They had actively robbed me to reward the golden child. They had taken my hard-earned money from my little internet thing, and used it to prop up their crumbling facade of the perfect, successful, generous family. That was the moment everything shifted inside me. The pain was gone. The sadness was gone. All that was left was a diamond-hard, ice-cold resolve. This was no longer about proving them wrong or seeking their approval. This was about justice. This was about consequences. My phone was on the desk in front of me. I picked it up, my hand perfectly steady. I didn't call my mother to scream at her. I didn't call my sister to confront her. I called my lawyer. Ms. Alvarez, I said when her assistant put me through. It's Ethan Reed. We need to talk. And I need you to start digging. I want to know everything about my family's finances. Everything. Hiring Ms. Alvarez was like bringing a tactical weapon to a back alley brawl. She was sharp, meticulous, and completely unsentimental. I met her the next day in her sleek, downtown office, a place that exuded quiet competence and expensive efficiency. I laid out the whole sordid story, the intervention, the meticulously crafted rumors of my homelessness, and the $15,000 withdrawal, for which I had printed out the bank statements. She listened intently, her face impassive, her pen scratching away on a yellow legal pad. Her silence was more intimidating than any shouting could ever be. When I finished, she looked up, her expression all business. "The bank transfer is a clear-cut case of misappropriation of funds," she said, her voice crisp and precise. "Given the family relationship, we could term it financial abuse. We can pursue legal action for that immediately, which would create significant leverage. But you said you want the full financial picture. That will take a bit more finesse. I'll need you to sign some paperwork, authorize me to make inquiries on your behalf. We'll be discreet, but thorough. Whatever it takes," I said, my voice hard. "I need to understand what's really going on behind the curtain." For the next week, I tried to focus on work while Ms. Alvarez and her team of forensic accountants did their thing. It was a strange, disembodying feeling, knowing that this hidden war was being waged on my behalf. Every email from her with the subject line "Update on Reed Family Inquiry" felt like a small, controlled explosion in my inbox. The first discoveries were about Sophia. My sister, the shining star of the family, the pillar of responsibility, was drowning in debt. It was worse than I could have imagined. Ms. Alvarez showed me the reports. She had maxed out credit cards from every high-end department store imaginable. She had a massive six-figure student loan from her prestigious law school that she was only paying the minimum on, meaning the principal was barely shrinking. Her previous car loan was already underwater. The new SUV wasn't a luxury. It was a desperate, foolish attempt to maintain an image she couldn't possibly afford. Her impressive salary was being systematically devoured by high-interest debt payments. She was living a lie. Then came the real bombshell, the one about my father. Ms. Alvarez called me. "Ethan, you need to see this. Can you come to my office this afternoon?" An hour later, I was sitting across from her gleaming desk, looking at a file thick with financial statements, bank loan agreements, and property deeds. "Your father's insurance business is barely breaking even," she began, pointing to a profit and loss statement that was bleeding red ink. "He's losing clients. But that's not his biggest problem. His biggest problem is this." She slid a thick document across the desk. It was a prospectus for a commercial real estate development project. A small strip mall on the outskirts of town. My father, along with a business partner named David Vance, had taken out a massive multi-million-dollar loan to finance it. "He bet the farm on this, Ethan," Ms. Alvarez said, her tone serious. "He leveraged almost everything he had. The family home has a second mortgage tied to this project. And the project is an unmitigated disaster. They're months behind schedule, wildly over budget, and two of their anchor tenants just pulled out of their lease agreements." She pointed to another document, a letter from the bank. "According to my sources, the loan is about to go into default. The bank is getting ready to call the loan, which means they'll foreclose and sell off the assets to the highest bidder to recoup their losses." I stared at the documents, a cold, sickening clarity washing over me. My father, the man who had lectured me my entire life about security and stability and real jobs, had made a reckless, high-risk gamble that would have made a Vegas poker player blush. And he was about to lose everything. Suddenly, it all made a horrifying kind of sense. The desperation, the intensified attacks on me. Kicking me out wasn't just about their chronic disappointment. It was about their own white-knuckled terror. If they could force me into a real job, they could perhaps guilt me into co-signing a loan, or at the very least, maintain the illusion that they were the successful, stable patriarchs of the family. My independence, my quiet success, was a threat to their lie. The theft of my money wasn't just for Sophia's car. It was a desperate cash grab from a family that was financially hemorrhaging and about to go under. This discovery was the second big twist. Their perfect, judgmental lives were a complete and utter sham. They weren't judging me from a position of success. They were judging me from a sinking ship. And they had just thrown me a map to their most vulnerable point. Knowledge is power. For the first time since this whole ugly ordeal began, I felt like I was in control. I wasn't just reacting to their insults and their betrayals anymore. I was on the offense. I could finally play chess, not just checkers. The perfect opportunity, the perfect opening move, arrived in my inbox 2 days later. It was an email from a man named Mr. Chun, the formidable CEO of a major private equity firm that had bought a stake in my company years ago. He was a sharp, old-school businessman I deeply respected, a man whose opinion carried immense weight in the financial world. His firm also published a highly influential quarterly business magazine, a must-read for anyone in the industry. His email was short, direct, and to the point. "Ethan, we've been watching your company's growth trajectory. It's remarkable. We'd like to feature you on the cover of our next issue. The theme is the new titans of tech. It would be an in-depth profile on your journey and your company's success. Let me know if you're interested." Interested? It was a gift from the heavens. It was a stage. A very public, very loud, and impeccably credible stage. I replied immediately, my fingers flying across the keyboard, formally accepting his generous offer. That same afternoon, I had another meeting with Ms. Alvarez. I laid the thick file on my father's failing real estate project on her desk. "I want to buy it," I said, my voice calm and steady. She raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "The project itself? Or the debt?" "The debt," I clarified. "That's the key. I want you to set up a shell corporation, a holding company with a bland, forgettable name that has absolutely no legal ties to me. I want that company to approach the bank and make an offer to buy my father's defaulted loan. They'll be desperate to get it off their books before the end of the quarter. Offer them 50 cents on the dollar in cash. They'll probably take it." Ms. Alvarez allowed herself a small, fleeting smile. It was a thin, predatory smile that made me glad she was on my side. "That's an aggressive move, Ethan. A shark move." "They were aggressive first," I said simply. "And this isn't just about revenge. Not entirely. I've looked at the project's plans, the location, the zoning. My father's mismanagement and undercapitalization were the problem, not the concept. With proper funding and competent leadership, it could be very profitable. This is a sound business decision. And if that sound business decision also happened to be the instrument of my family's final karmic reckoning, well, that was just a very satisfying bonus." The next 2 weeks were a blur of coordinated, covert activity. I did the photo shoot for the magazine cover, sitting in my office, looking out over the city, feeling for all the world like the man they were describing on the page. I gave a lengthy, in-depth interview to a top financial journalist, talking about my journey, the early struggles, the breakthroughs, the philosophy behind my company. I never once mentioned my family. In the story of my success, they were a footnote at best. Meanwhile, Ms. Alvarez worked her quiet, legal magic. The Shell Corporation, Apex Holdings LLC, was formed. The offer was made to the bank's distressed assets division. After a short but intense negotiation, the bank, eager to cut its losses and clean up its balance sheet, accepted. Just like that, for a fraction of its original value, I became the primary creditor for my father's biggest dream and his worst nightmare. I owned his debt. I controlled his financial fate. The trap was set. The bait was laid. All I had to do now was wait for the magazine to hit the newsstands and light the fuse. The day the magazine came out, the dam of silence from my family finally broke, and a torrent of panicked communication flooded my phone. It started before I'd even had my morning coffee. A text message from Leo. It wasn't words. It was just a picture he'd taken with his phone of the magazine cover on a newsstand. My face, looking confident and determined, staring out from under a bold, unmissable headline. Ethan Reed, the $15 million man nobody saw coming. Below the picture, Leo had simply typed 3 question marks. Oh? Then came the phone calls, a frantic, desperate barrage. First, my mother. I watched her picture pop up on my screen and calmly let it go to voicemail. The message she left was a frantic, stammering masterpiece of disbelief. Ethan? Ethan, darling, it's Mom. I just saw. Your uncle sent me a picture of this magazine. Is this some kind of joke? A prank? Please call me. We need to talk about this. This can't be real. Her voice was a bizarre mixture of shock and, for the very first time since I was a child, a hint of raw, undisguised fear. Next, my father. He didn't bother leaving a message. He just called. Over and over and over. 10 times in a row. Each time his name flashed on the screen, I hit the ignore button. Each rejected call felt like a small, satisfying click of a lock falling into place. Sophia's reaction, predictably, came via social media. She didn't post anything herself. She was too clever for that. But friends started sending me screenshots. She had jumped into the comments section of the magazine's official online post, arguing with complete strangers. "This is a gross exaggeration of his circumstances," she wrote in one reply. "My brother does not have this kind of money. The media is so irresponsible and prints anything for clicks." Someone immediately replied, "LOL. Sounds like someone's jealous." She deleted all her comments shortly after that, but the damage was done. She looked petty and foolish. The world now saw me as a success, a major one, and it was driving my family, the architects of my failure narrative, completely and utterly insane. Their carefully constructed story, the one that made them the long-suffering saints and me the prodigal failure, had been publicly and spectacularly demolished by a single glossy magazine cover. I let them stew in their confusion and panic for 3 full days. I let their calls go unanswered, their increasingly desperate texts unread. I wanted them to understand on a visceral level that the dynamic of our relationship had fundamentally and permanently changed. I was no longer the one on the outside looking in, seeking their approval. They were now the ones desperate for my attention, for my validation, for my forgiveness. On the 4th day, I made my move. I had a professional courier service deliver a thick, cream-colored envelope to their house. Inside was not a letter of explanation or a demand for an apology. It was a simple, elegantly printed invitation card. It read, "Richard, Eleanor, and Sophia Reed, you are cordially invited to a private dinner to celebrate a new business venture. Hosted by Ethan Reed. Friday evening at 8 o'clock sharp. The Grandview Restaurant, the Skyline Room." The Grandview was the most exclusive, most expensive restaurant in the entire city. A place they had only ever talked about going to for a major anniversary or celebration, but had never actually been able to afford. It was a calculated power move, and they knew it. The Skyline Room was their most private, most prestigious dining room. I didn't include an RSVP number or contact information. I knew with absolute certainty that they would be there. They were too desperate, too confused, and too greedy not to be. They would come expecting an apology, an explanation, and most importantly, a handout. They would walk into that private room thinking they were about to finally get a piece of their son's mysterious fortune. They had no idea they were walking in to be served for dinner. The stage was set. The actors were on their way. The final, brutal act of this family tragedy was about to begin. The Skyline Room at the Grandview was on the top floor, with a single, massive floor-to-ceiling window that offered a breathtaking, panoramic view of the glittering city. A view very similar, I noted with some satisfaction, to the one from my own home. I arrived early and sat at the head of the long, formal dining table, the seat of power, and waited. They arrived exactly at 8 o'clock, a united front of awkwardness, confusion, and poorly concealed greed. My father was wearing his best suit, the one that was now a little too tight at the waist and smelled faintly of mothballs. My mother had on a pearl necklace and a forced, brittle smile that didn't reach her terrified eyes. Sophia looked around the opulent room with wide, hungry eyes, her usual arrogance tempered by a desperate curiosity she couldn't quite hide. "Ethan," my father said, clearing his throat as they took their seats, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent room. "This is all. Quite a surprise. A magnificent place." "I'm full of them," I replied coolly, signaling to the white-gloved waiter to pour the expensive wine I had pre-selected. The small talk that followed was excruciating, a masterclass in avoidance. They tried to act as if the last month, the last decade, had never happened. My mother complimented the floral centerpiece. Sophia asked about the wine vintage with an air of faux sophistication. My father attempted to talk about the stock market, as if he and I were financial peers who regularly discussed our portfolios. I let them stumble and posture and lie, sipping my water, saying very little, letting their discomfort grow in the lengthening silences. Finally, after the appetizers were cleared, my father put his hands flat on the table, a gesture of someone trying to take control. Son, he began, the words sounding foreign and clumsy coming from his lips. About that magazine article, we may have misjudged your venture. It seems you've done quite well for yourself. You think, I said, my voice dangerously soft, letting the question hang in the air. My mother, sensing an opportunity for a rewrite of history, jumped in. We were just worried, darling. A mother is allowed to worry. It all seems so risky. We never meant to hurt you. We're so proud of you. We always have been, deep down. The lie was so bald, so shameless. It was almost impressive in its audacity. Sophia, ever the opportunist, saw her opening and dove in headfirst. What Dad and Mom are trying to say is we're family. Family has misunderstandings. And we're sorry if we didn't get it. But now that you're in this position, maybe we can put all that behind us. I actually have a few business ideas myself, some startups that just need a little seed money. And with your capital and my legal expertise, I held up a hand, a simple, quiet gesture that cut her off mid-sentence. She stopped, her mouth slightly open, surprised. I didn't invite you here to talk about my money, I said, my voice cutting through the thick layer of pretense in the room. I invited you here to talk about a business opportunity, my latest acquisition. I let that hang in the air for a moment, enjoying the confused looks on their faces. As you know, I continued, my eyes locking directly onto my father's. The commercial real estate market can be a very unforgiving place. It requires careful management, meticulous foresight, and most importantly, adequate capitalization. Without those things, even a project with great potential can fail spectacularly. I saw a flicker of raw panic in my father's eyes. He knew exactly where this was going. Sophia and my mother just looked confused. I recently became aware of a local development project, I said, my voice steady and relentless as a drumbeat. A strip mall, over-leveraged, months behind schedule, hemorrhaging money from every pore. The bank was about to foreclose. A real disaster in the making. My father went pale, a sickly, grayish color. My mother looked at him, her brow furrowed in confusion. It seemed like a bad investment to most. I went on, my voice never rising, never betraying any emotion. But I saw potential. I believe that under new management, with a proper infusion of cash, it could be turned around and made highly profitable. So I made a move. I formed a new company, a holding company, and that company purchased the project's entire outstanding debt from the bank. The deal was finalized last week. I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. Then, I leaned forward slightly and delivered the final, fatal blow. It was your property, Dad. Your dream project. It's mine now. My father stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, no sound coming out. Sophia's jaw literally dropped. My mother looked back and forth between us, her face a mask of utter bewilderment. You can't do that. My father finally stammered, his voice a pathetic squeak. That's my life's work. My legacy. It was a failing business that you were about to lose anyway. I stated, my voice as cold and hard as the marble floor. And I bought it. It's just business. My mother finally found her voice, a horrified, trembling whisper. But why, Ethan? How could you do this to your own father? How could you just walk in and take it from him? I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto hers, and I gave her the truth she had earned, the truth she had paid for with $15,000 of my money. I walked into his business, I said, my voice as cold and sharp as a shard of glass. The exact same way you walked into my bank account and took my money, without a word, without permission. The color drained from her face as if a plug had been pulled. In that moment, in the stunned, horrified silence of that lavish dining room, they finally understood. This wasn't a celebration. This wasn't a reconciliation. It was a foreclosure. And everything they had, everything they thought they were, was now mine. This is the moment that changed everything, when I finally took back control of my own life. Thank you for sticking with me to this point. You guys are amazing. If you could do me a huge favor and like this video and comment with the number 1 below, it lets me know you made it this far with me. It not only helps more people find this story, but it also tells me that my experiences mean something to someone out there. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to continue sharing the rest of this journey. The aftermath of that dinner was not loud and explosive, but a quiet, creeping decay. I left them sitting in that silent, expensive room, the bill already paid. I didn't look back as I walked out, the city lights welcoming me back to my own life. The public humiliation came first, and it was brutal. News travels fast in the small, incestuous world of local business and social circles. The story was just too juicy, too karmically perfect, to stay quiet. Richard Reed, the pompous insurance salesman who always acted like a real estate mogul in the making, had not only failed spectacularly, but he'd lost his entire project to the very son he'd publicly disowned and called a failure. My father became a ghost. According to Leo, who still gave me reluctant updates, he didn't leave the house for weeks. His business partner, David Vance, formally dissolved their partnership with a scathing letter that apparently circulated among their mutual acquaintances. My father's reputation, the one thing he valued more than his own family, was in tatters. He was no longer a man to be respected at the country club. He was a cautionary tale, a punchline. Sophia's downfall was just as swift and just as public. Her entire world was built on the fragile image of success, an image funded by staggering debt and parental handouts. With the family's secret bankruptcy now an open secret, her fiancé, Brian, the smug corporate lawyer who had looked down on me with such disdain, saw the writing on the wall. He was engaged to a lifestyle, not a person, and that lifestyle had just been foreclosed on. He called off the wedding via a terse email. The reason he gave, which Sophia apparently screamed at my mother over the phone for hours, was that he could not in good conscience build a future with someone from such a financially and morally bankrupt family. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Without my father's financial support or the prospect of a wealthy husband to bail her out, Sophia's mountain of debt became an avalanche she couldn't escape. The first thing to go was the brand new luxury SUV, the one my money had made the down payment on. I saw it listed online a few weeks later, under the heading Motivated Seller, Must Go. She had to sell it for a significant loss. Then, she had to give up her trendy, overpriced apartment in the city and move back into her childhood bedroom in my parents' house. The golden child had returned to the nest, not in triumph, but in total abject defeat. They were all trapped together now, in that house filled with bad memories and cheap glass figurines, suffocating in the ashes of their own arrogance. After a few weeks of what I assume was shocked silence, the desperate appeals began. They came in the form of rambling, pathetic voicemails, each one a different flavor of manipulation. The first was from my mother. Her voice was thin and reedy, trying desperately to sound sweet and motherly, but it was laced with a panic she couldn't conceal. "Ethan, darling, it's your mother. I know you're angry. You have a right to be, but you can't do this. Your father, he's a broken man. He just sits in his chair all day. We're still your family, Ethan. You can't just cut us off like this after everything we've done for you." "Everything you've done for me?" I thought, my thumb hovering over the delete button before pressing down firmly. The next one came a week later, from my father. His usual booming, authoritative voice was gone, replaced by a weak, gravelly tone I barely recognized. "Ethan, look, I was wrong. Okay, I said it. You were right. I admit it. This project, it's all I have left. It's my legacy. Don't take it from me. We can work something out. I'll be your partner. I can help you. I know the business." The idea was so absurd it was almost comical. He wanted to help me run the business he had already single-handedly driven into the ground. I deleted the message without a second thought. The final one was the most telling. It was my mother again, but the fake sweetness was gone, stripped away to reveal the raw, ugly entitlement beneath. Her voice was sharp, angry, and accusatory. "Is this what you wanted, Ethan? To humiliate us? To destroy your own family? I hope you're happy. I hope all that money you worship keeps you warm at night. You've changed. "You are not the son I raised." She was right about one thing. I wasn't the son she raised. The son she raised was a quiet, hopeful boy who would do anything for a scrap of her approval. He was gone. I had been forced to kill him to survive. I knew then that I couldn't leave the door open, not even a tiny crack. They would continue to harass me, to try and manipulate me, to poison my life forever. So I had Ms. Alvarez draft one final official document. It was a simple settlement agreement. It stated that I, Ethan Reed, would not press criminal charges against Eleanor Reed for the unauthorized withdrawal of $15,000 from my savings account. In exchange, they, Richard, Eleanor, and Sophia Reed, would agree to a permanent, legally binding restraining order. They were not to contact me, my business, or any of my associates by any means ever again. She sent it to them via a legal courier. They signed it and returned it the very next day. There was no final, tearful confrontation. There was no dramatic, movie-style reconciliation. Our relationship didn't end with a bang of anger or a whisper of regret. It ended with the cold, impersonal scratch of a pen on a legal document. And with that, I was finally, completely, irrevocably free. The year that followed was one of intense, focused, and deeply satisfying work. It was a joyful kind of work, the kind that builds and creates instead of drains and depletes. I poured my energy, my focus, and my resources into the failed real estate project, immediately renaming it the Phoenix Plaza. The name felt right. It was a symbol of something beautiful and strong rising from the ashes of my father's failure and my family's toxicity. I brought in a new team of architects and project managers, bright and energetic people who were excited by the challenge. We completely redesigned the layout, secured high-quality tenants that the community actually wanted, and invested heavily in modernizing the infrastructure and creating a welcoming green space. Where my father had cut corners to save a few dollars, I invested in quality that would last for decades. Where he had been indecisive and paralyzed by fear, I was decisive and bold. The project, which had once been a symbol of my family's downfall, was slowly but surely transforming into a thriving symbol of my own competence. 6 months after the takeover, the Phoenix Plaza had its grand opening. It was a huge success. It was fully leased, with a popular organic grocery store as the anchor tenant, a trendy independent coffee shop, a yoga studio, a bookstore, and several bustling local businesses. It became a vibrant, beloved hub for the community. It was profitable within the first quarter, far exceeding even my own optimistic projections. My personal life began to blossom as well. Free from the constant stress and emotional baggage of my family, I found myself with the energy to invest in real relationships. I reconnected with old college friends who had known about my business from the start and had always been supportive, people I had neglected in my single-minded pursuit of success. I started dating again, meeting a woman who was intelligent, kind, and impressed by my passion, not my net worth. I even reconnected with Sarah, a good friend from high school who had reached out after seeing the magazine article. She didn't ask for a job or an investment. She just sent a simple text that said, "Knew you had it in you all along. Drinks to celebrate." We had coffee and then dinner, and it was easy and natural and fun. It felt good to be seen for who I was, without any filters or family narratives. My company continued to grow and innovate. We launched a new software suite that became an industry leader, earning us accolades and a whole new level of respect in the tech world. At the end of the year, at a big industry gala in New York, I was honored with the Entrepreneur of the Year award. Standing on that stage, looking out at a crowd of my peers with my real family, my business partner Marcus, my dedicated team, my supportive friends, cheering for me in the front row, I felt a sense of profound peace and belonging I'd never known. I also started a small foundation, a passion project of mine. It was a mentorship program that provided seed funding and, more importantly, guidance to young entrepreneurs who, like me, had a vision but didn't fit the traditional mold. I met with a group of them once a month, in a conference room at the Phoenix Plaza. In their bright, hopeful, slightly terrified faces, I saw a clear reflection of my younger self. One of them, a brilliant young woman with a groundbreaking idea for an educational app, asked me during a Q&A session, "What was the biggest obstacle you had to overcome to get where you are?" I thought for a moment, the angry, disappointed faces of my family flashing in my mind. The biggest obstacle, I said, looking around the room at the aspiring dreamers, was learning to stop listening to the people who told me my dream was impossible, especially when those people were the ones who were supposed to believe in me the most. Your belief in yourself has to be louder than their doubt. About a year and a half after that fateful dinner at the Grandview, I had a business meeting with David Vance, my father's former partner. My company was looking to acquire a smaller tech firm that he had an early investment in, and he had requested a face-to-face meeting to finalize the details. We met at the independent coffee shop in the Phoenix Plaza, a place that was now bustling with morning customers. He was an older, pragmatic man with a weary look in his eyes that suggested he'd seen it all. After we settled the business details of the acquisition quickly and amicably, he leaned back in his chair, stirring his coffee and looking around the vibrant plaza. "You know," he said, a note of genuine admiration in his voice, "you did a hell of a job with this place. A real hell of a job. I drive by here sometimes just to look at it." "Thank you, David. I saw the potential." He gave a dry, humorless chuckle. "Potential your old man couldn't see past his own damn ego. I want to tell you something, Ethan. Something you should probably know. For your own peace of mind." He leaned forward, lowering his voice conspiratorially, even though no one was listening. "The week before your company came in and bought the loan, the rest of the investors and I had already made a decision. We were holding a vote to have Richard forcibly removed from the project. We were going to trigger the clauses in our partnership agreement to have him declared a liability and force him to sell his shares to us for pennies on the dollar. He was running the entire project into the ground, refusing to listen to engineers, architects, anyone. He was incompetent, a clear and present danger to our investment. I just listened, my expression unreadable, letting his words sink in. He was going to lose it all anyway, one way or another," David continued, looking me straight in the eye with a surprising intensity. "The only difference is that he would have taken the whole project and all the investors down with him in a blaze of glory. You didn't just take his project, son. You saved it. You saved my retirement fund, and you saved the jobs of a dozen construction workers and staff who were about to get laid off. What you did, it might have felt like revenge to you, but from where I was standing, it was a damn smart, albeit ruthless, business move." Hearing those words from him, from someone who was there, who saw it all unfold, was like the final, missing piece of a complicated puzzle clicking into place. Any lingering, microscopic shred of guilt I might have carried about what I did to my father was instantly and permanently erased. I hadn't destroyed his dream. He had done that all by himself through his own pride and incompetence. I had simply been the one to pick up the pieces and build something better from the wreckage. Later that week, as if the universe wanted to provide a final, definitive postscript, a single email appeared in my inbox. It was from my mother's old email address, an address I hadn't blocked but had long since forgotten. I almost deleted it without opening, dismissing it as spam. But my curiosity got the better of me. The subject line was my name, Ethan. The body of the email contained only 3 stark words. "You've changed." I stared at the words on the screen for a long moment. She meant it as an accusation, a final, bitter condemnation from a woman who had lost all power over me. But I read it as a simple statement of fact. A glorious, hard-won, liberating fact. Yes, I had changed. I had changed from a boy who was starving for their approval into a man who approved of himself. I didn't reply. I didn't feel a surge of anger or a pang of sadness. For the first time, when I thought of them, I felt nothing at all. I simply moved the cursor over the message and clicked delete. Tonight, I'm standing on the balcony of my penthouse, a place that once felt like a secret I had to keep. The city is spread out before me, a vast, glittering universe of light and life, humming with endless possibility. The air is cool and clean. From this height, if I look in the right direction, I can just make out the bright, welcoming lights of the Phoenix Plaza, a small but powerful beacon in the sprawling metropolis. It's strange to think about how much can change, and how much you have to change to make it happen. Not so long ago, I was that kid in the garage dreaming of building something from nothing. Then, for so many years, I was the son in the living room, being told that my dream was worthless, a child's fantasy. I spent so much of my energy, so much of my life, chasing a ghost, the ghost of my family's approval. I foolishly believed that if I could just make them see me, really see me for who I was, then I would finally feel whole, validated, and complete. But I've learned a hard lesson. You can't force people to see you, especially when they are committed to misunderstanding you. You can only choose to see yourself. You have to be the one to validate your own worth, to champion your own dreams, to be the unwavering advocate for your own life. The moment I stopped needing their permission to be successful was the moment I truly became successful. The moment I stopped letting them define me was the moment I finally defined myself. The money, the penthouse, the company, the awards, they're not the prize. They are simply the byproducts, the consequences of me finally, bravely choosing my own path. The real prize is this feeling right here, right now. The quiet confidence, the profound freedom, the deep and abiding peace that comes from knowing you built your own world, on your own terms, brick by painstaking brick. My mother's last email said I'd changed. She was right. I am no longer the person who would let their toxicity and their doubt poison my life. I am the man who survived it, who learned from it, and who built something better in its place. My father told me to go live on the streets. He meant it as a curse. He wanted to see me broken and destitute, to prove that his way of life, his values were the only correct ones. But he failed to understand something fundamental about me. He failed to see the fire of resilience that he and my family had inadvertently stoked within me for years with every insult, every dismissal, every act of betrayal. I look out at the city, at the buildings and the roads and the endless stream of lights, at the world I am now a vital part of. And I think to myself, with a final, quiet smile that is all my own, they told me to go live on the streets. In the end, I didn't just go live on the streets. I bought the whole block. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. It's a strange thing to share something so personal, but I feel it's important because I know I'm not alone in these kinds of struggles. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between who you are and who your family wanted you to be? I'd be honored to read your experiences. Please share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next.